The red light above the studio camera blinked on, and just like that, every breath, every glance, every syllable spoken on that polished stage was instantly broadcast to millions of viewers across the country. The set was sleek and modern high-back leather chairs, a glowing panel desk, and a muted American flag swaying subtly on a digital background. It was more than a debate, it was political theater, and tonight's main act was one the audience had not seen before. Barron Trump sat tall, dressed in a crisp navy suit and a white shirt that almost seemed to glow under the lights. His fingers were steepled together in a pose eerily reminiscent of his father's, and his face betrayed nothing. No nervousness, no anxiety, just the cold, unreadable calm of someone who had spent a lifetime under scrutiny. Across from him sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, known as much for her fiery oratory as for her bold, unapologetic presence. Dressed in a tailored deep purple blazer, her posture was relaxed but alert, like a seasoned fighter waiting for the bell to ring. She didn't need to prove anything, and that calm authority practically radiated from her. The moderator, a well-respected CNN anchor, leaned into his mic. "We're live," he said with a smile that barely concealed the anticipation humming beneath the surface. "Tonight, we ask a question on everyone's mind. In an age of performative politics, who still speaks truth to power?" The debate kicked off gently, enough some comments on transparency in government, ethics reform, campaign finance. But it didn't take long for Barron to veer off script. His voice was measured, his tone calm, but his words landed like a slap across the table. "I find it curious," Barron began, his gaze fixed on Crockett with the calculated stillness of a chess master making his first move, "that those who claim to fight for marginalized voices often spend more time in front of cameras than inside their communities. Public service shouldn't be a branding exercise." He said this with the subtle smirk of someone who had been waiting days to deliver the line. Crockett didn't flinch. She let the silence linger for a moment, as though choosing not to dignify his remark with an immediate response. Then she turned slightly toward him, her tone unshaken. "It's easy to talk about community from behind a glass tower in Manhattan," she replied, her voice steady and low. "The kind that quiets a room without needing to shout. But when you've walked through neighborhoods that feel forgotten by the very system they fund, you learn that being seen matters because invisibility is how oppression thrives." Barron shifted in his chair, crossing one leg over the other, trying to maintain his composed posture. But his eyebrows lifted slightly as if he hadn't expected such a poised counterpunch. Not so early in the evening. "Well," Barron said, adjusting his cufflinks as if they might shield him from the weight of her words, "visibility without substance is just..." "Spoken like someone who's never had to fight to be heard," she answered, her voice rising just enough to fill the room without a microphone. "When you grow up surrounded by power, you confuse the silence of others for agreement. I raise my voice not for theatrics, Mr. Trump, but because people like me were told to sit down and be quiet. And I didn't." She said it like a fact, not a performance. The kind of truth that doesn't ask for applause, it simply exists. There was a brief pause. The moderator looked from one to the other, sensing the room heating up with each verbal exchange. The crowd, half political insiders, half college students, was silent but locked in. No one blinked. This was no longer about campaign finance. This was about something deeper, a collision of entitlement and experience, of inherited legacy versus earned authority. And Barron, for the first time that evening, leaned ever so slightly forward. His smile was still there, but it no longer felt so effortless. As the debate moved forward, the air in the studio had shifted. The lights overhead, though engineered to be cool and clinical, now seemed to cast long, dramatic shadows across the two figures seated on the stage, like a theater set in slow combustion. The moderator tried to steer the conversation toward education reform, but everyone in the room could feel it. The real debate wasn't about policy anymore. It was about presence, about authenticity, about who truly belonged in this conversation. Barron Trump rested his elbow on the desk, then laced his fingers together with slow, deliberate control. "I've visited schools across the country, places where students are graduating without the ability to read at grade level," he began, his voice as clear and precise as the tailored collar on his suit. And yet we spend billions on administrative overhead and ideological curricula. We've made education about feelings, not facts, about comfort, not excellence. He turned slightly toward Crockett again, eyes narrowing not in anger, but in focus, like a surgeon preparing an incision. "And what do you do?" Barron asked. "You go on television, and instead of addressing failing schools, you talk about equity metrics and lived experience as if vocabulary can fix infrastructure. It's abstraction over action." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm, clinical tone was designed to sting because it implied something worse than hostility. It implied dismissal. Jasmine Crockett exhaled sharply through her nose, the way someone does when deciding whether to dismantle an argument or the person making it. "You want to talk about facts?" she said, lifting a hand slightly in the air as though weighing his words. "Here's a fact. America never intended for every child to succeed equally. Our entire system was built to preserve the comfort of some by denying the opportunity of others. You talk about vocabulary like it's a distraction, but language is power. Words define what we see, what we ignore, what we punish, and what we praise." She leaned in now, her voice controlled, but rich with decades of personal fire. "And maybe you've walked through schools that failed their students. I've graduated from them. I've watched classmates disappear from rosters and end up behind bars instead of behind desks. So don't sit there and tell me I don't know what failure looks like. I've survived it." The studio fell silent. Even the moderator looked unsure of what to say next. Barron didn't answer immediately. His gaze dropped to the desk for a second as if taking in the gravity of her words, and then returned to her with a new kind of precision. Less dismissive now, more curious. "I don't doubt that you've overcome things I can't imagine," Barron replied, his tone noticeably softened. "But survival isn't a policy. The pain you've lived through doesn't automatically make your ideas effective. Experience gives you insight, but it doesn't exempt you from critique." He paused, then added more quietly, "I'm not your enemy. I just think we need more than emotion to fix a broken system." That small statement, unexpected and almost vulnerable in its delivery, hung in the air like a detour sign in the middle of a speeding highway. Jasmine tilted her head slightly. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite agreement, but recognition. "I never said pain was a policy," she replied, "but neither is indifference. And every time someone like you enters these conversations and tells us to remove the emotion, what you're really saying is, make it more comfortable for me to hear. But the truth isn't always comfortable." She leaned back in her chair now, not out of fatigue, but out of strategic patience. "You say you're not my enemy. Maybe that's true. But you're not my ally either, not yet. Because if you were, you'd understand that our pain isn't an inconvenience to be tolerated. It's the foundation upon which this entire democracy was built, and it demands to be heard." Another pause. The moderator cleared his throat nervously. "Let's pivot to criminal justice reform." But the audience barely noticed, because at that moment, the debate had peeled itself away from headlines and hashtags and found its way into something much more difficult, the human core beneath policy. Two people staring across a chasm of class, race, history, and trauma trying, not always successfully, to speak in a language the other could understand. The studio lights dimmed, but the tension in the air remained thick, like smoke hanging after a fire. The crowd's applause had faded, replaced by the low murmur of crew packing up equipment and journalists whispering among themselves. Barron Trump and Jasmine Crockett remained seated, their eyes locking in a moment that felt far heavier than the hours they had spent exchanging words in front of millions. Neither spoke at first. Finally, Jasmine broke the silence, her voice quieter now, stripped of the polished edge it carried on air. "You were right about one thing," she said slowly, looking down at her hands. "Experience alone doesn't fix anything, but neither does cold logic when it ignores the people it's supposed to serve." Barron nodded, his posture relaxing slightly. "I wasn't trying to dismiss your pain," he admitted. "It's just hard sometimes to know how to turn that pain into something that changes the system, rather than just staying stuck in it." She looked up, eyes meeting his with a flicker of understanding. "That's the hardest part. Knowing that we're fighting not just against policy failures, but against the weight of history and against the fear people have of truly listening." He offered a small, genuine smile, rare for someone so guarded. Maybe that's where we start, by actually listening. A pause settled between them, not an awkward silence, but one heavy with possibility. Jasmine leaned forward. If we want to change things, we have to build bridges, not just argue from opposite sides. Barron's gaze softened. I'm willing to try. For the first time that evening, the walls between them seemed to crack. Outside the studio, the world continued its endless spin of headlines and opinions, but inside, two people divided by so much had begun something fragile, a real conversation. As the lights dimmed and the cameras stopped rolling, what lingered was not the heat of debate, but a quiet understanding and acknowledgement that beneath our polarized words lie shared hopes and fears. Barron Trump's exchange with Jasmine Crockett was more than just a televised confrontation. It was a mirror reflecting the fractured soul of a nation, struggling to reconcile ideals with reality. In that fleeting moment of connection, Barron discovered that change does not come from overpowering the other side with facts or accusations, but from the courage to listen when it is hardest to do so. The system's flaws are not just policy failures on paper. They are wounds carried by real people. And those wounds demand empathy as much as action. This story invites us to reflect. How often do we approach disagreement as an opportunity to deepen our understanding rather than to win? How frequently do we let fear and anger silence the possibility of common ground? Barron's journey is a reminder that true progress begins when we dare to break the walls of division and build bridges, step by step, conversation by conversation. It challenges us to look beyond headlines and soundbites and to engage with the human stories at the heart of every issue. Ultimately, this is more than a political debate. It's a call for humanity and dialogue. A call that echoes far beyond the studio, urging each of us to become not just spectators, but participants in shaping a more compassionate and just future. As Barron walked away that night, he carried with him a simple truth. The path to change begins with listening, and sometimes that is the hardest conversation we'll ever have. Let's keep the conversation going. Subscribe, share, and drop your thoughts below. Your perspective is valuable and might inspire others.